NetSparker, the developers of desktop and cloud-based web application security scanners that enable you to automatically identify vulnerabilities in your web applications and web services. NetSparker scanners employ a unique and dead-accurate vulnerability scanning engine that automatically verifies vulnerabilities with their proof of concept. For more information, visit them on the web at netsparker.com or email at contact@netsparker.com. Recorded Future. They help security teams make more confident decisions faster. Recorded Future's technology automates broad collection and analysis of cyber threat data and delivers the rich external context you need to understand alerts and emerging threats. With real-time threat intelligence from Recorded Future, security teams respond to threats 63% faster and find undetected threats 10 times quicker. To get started, go to recordedfuture.com/securityweekly and sign up for the Recorded Future Cyber Daily. Every day, you'll receive an email with the top results for trending technical indicators, cyber news, exploited vulnerabilities, suspicious IP addresses, and more. Subscribe today and stay ahead of cyber attacks. Endgame's converged endpoint security platform is transforming security programs, their people, processes, and technology with the most powerful endpoint protection and simplest user experience, ensuring analysts of any skill level can stop targeted attacks before information theft. Endgame unifies prevention, detection, and threat hunting to stop known and unknown attacker behaviors at scale with a single agent. For more information, visit endgame.com. Welcome back, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. Quick announcement, we're running our annual listener feedback survey. You can go to securityweekly.com, click the survey tab, fill out our 2019 listener survey, where we want to hear from you. What do you want to see on the show? What kind of things are you interested in? And it will shape both the content and the sponsors on this show. I am very excited to bring on my good friend, Mr. Dave Kennedy. Dave and I have a long history together in information security, and it makes me so happy that we still get to do things together and see each other. And Dave graciously agreed to appear on the show last minute, and I purposely chose two topics, Dave, that are very near and dear to your heart and very timely. And one is the Coalfire incident that happened that we're still very much talking about in the community, and you and TrustedSec have done some things around, and I want to talk about DerbyCon communities. So Dave needs no introduction. Dave, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on, Paul. It's a total pleasure and honor to be on the show again, and totally agree with that friendship piece there. We've had a lot of experiences together, some good, some bad.
So like so many stories. I was just telling folks this morning that they're like, how have you been in the community for so long? And I'm like, basically, we go to conferences and we hang out, and maybe we drink till like 3 a.m. and just talk shop, right? I mean, and that's really the foundation of this show, right? Is we get around and we drink, and you've got to play basketball after this, so and I don't blame you for not
remind me.
Drinking. Like if I had to exercise after the show, I wouldn't be drinking either.
Well, the other thing that's really interesting is, Dave and I have this really I lived in Cleveland for 16 years. I went to Case Western Reserve. I have my bachelor's, my master's from Case. But Dave and I never connected in Cleveland. I think I moved to Colorado in 2004. We kind of missed each other in the security scene. And so it's always interesting because I reminisce about Cleveland, and I lived in Lake County and Willoughby for years. And so every time you get there, I'm like, I want to do some like Cleveland trivia, kind of like revamp some of the old times too. So we haven't done that yet. Maybe we'll hit on a couple of them during the segment. But it's
Dave,
so
you're
so
like
fun.
a celebrity at the Cav games, right? Like I see all the pictures on social media. Like how we hang at the basketball game. That's really cool.
We could talk Baker Mayfield and the Browns. We could talk the Indians. I still track all those teams because that's who I grew up. I grew up in Fremont, near Toledo. Went to Case. My wife grew up on the east side of Cleveland. And so I've always had this roots in the Browns athletics, Cavs, the Indians, the Browns, and gone through all the pains, the 88 and the 89 and all that stuff. So it's, it's always fun to have you on and maybe we can talk a little Cleveland stuff. But
absolutely. I want to transition to the Coalfire thing because that is an issue that's near and dear to my heart as well. And I had rules when I was doing pen testing full time. I was just sharing my story earlier today in some meetings, and there was a time where I was a full-time pen tester, and I had some rules. Like, first rule is I always got permission. And, like, as much permission as I need to get from as many people in the organization I was testing, you need permission. And it was a very clear rule, like the difference between getting arrested and being in an orange jumpsuit and being an ethical hacker is permission, right? And I preach that to my children, to people in the community. Like the difference between evil hackers and good hackers is permission. And whether that's permission to break into a lock or to lock picking, or when I teach lock picking to my friends and family, and they're like, that's
Your
evil.
sons.
I'm like, it's only evil if you don't have permission. I've given you these locks. I've given you permission to break into them. If you use this skill that I teach you, you must have permission. The other rule was, I don't do physical pen tests in anywhere that had armed guards. Because myself, testers we might be working with, Dave, I know you have teams of testers, right? We have families. You don't want to put people in harm's way for the sake of security. Yeah, and some people do those tests, and okay, that's their decision. My decision, no armed guards, not doing physical security. But now to go back to the original issue, Dave, I think you're likely in attendance of the conference that the community is putting on, and in support of this mission of permission. So from your perspective, inform our audience about the Coalfire incident and the things that you've done at TrustedSec to support our community in this effort.
Yeah, so I'll pop in first and say that ethics are definitely one of the most important things when it comes to this industry. And that's one of the most important things that we have. If you look at lawyers, for example, they have the bar associations and ethics in those types of areas. We don't really have anything similar to that other than maybe attestations to a CISSP or things like that, but no real ethics board or things like that really cause us to look at our ethics and what we're doing. And, when you're doing things like this, and I explain to my kids all the time, they're like, hey, I want to figure out how to lockpick. I'm like, cool, here's the rules around that. And here's the times you can use it. And here's the only time that it's applicable. And it's when you have explicit permission to do it, or it's your own devices that you're experimenting or learning on. And, when it comes to the physical penetration tests, I really think that the Coalfire incident was not a rude awakening, but it's something that hadn't really been discussed before in the past, because we had been doing this I've been in the industry now for 19 years, which we're getting old, Paul.
Right? But, it's only like almost 20 years we've been doing this kind of thing, right?
It's crazy. But you look at that and you say, well, we've been doing this for 19 years and nothing's bad has happened. So I'm sure we're fine. I'm sure people that did this before us, figured everything else out, and I'm sure everything was good then. And we're just going through the same things that everybody else has before in the past. And the truth of the matter is that there are specific laws, federal laws within the United States that are very specific in nature. And specifically federal law 18 USC 1030 basically makes any type of break into a facility illegal. Without permission. And so what happened in the Coalfire incident?
Is that the way I've always interpreted the laws is they say unauthorized access. Yes. And so I think you and I both in the whole community were like, if we have permission, that means that they were authorized, right? And it seemed very clear up until now that authorization was authorization, right?
Yep, exactly right. And what's interesting about that one is that people will argue that you need to have malicious intent, and that's not the case. In fact, you could break into a facility and clean the place up and do amazing things, but an intent wasn't malicious, but you still broke into the place without authorization. And what happened in this Coalfire incident is that they were engaged with the states to conduct a physical penetration test. They had authorization from the state of Iowa. And the argument is that the state didn't have authorization to conduct the physical pen test against the county, which ultimately said that those two testers were there illegally in violation of the federal law.
Interesting.
And what's interesting is I just got done speaking at AwarenessCon, which was put on by Black Hills and John Strand, which, kudos to him going out to Iowa to educate people, to talk about it.
Oh, so Dave, did you go to, because I talked with John last week, and he said, we're going to Iowa. We're going to the county where this happened, and specifically putting on a conference in this town to raise awareness. Were you in attendance of that as well?
I was remote. I did a remote call with them, and it was yesterday. And throughout the entire day, they had talks going on throughout the entire day. And what was interesting is right in the middle of my talk, I had to stop my talk, and the sheriff that actually arrested the two individuals came to do a talk.
Wow.
And what was interesting is that, I think in the security industry, especially when it's one of our own, our reaction, and I had the same reaction, was the sheriffs probably had no idea what they're doing. They probably weren't experienced in this field, and that these charges need to be dropped immediately because, we're conducting an assessment on behalf of an organization that gave us authorization. We shouldn't be stuck in the middle of a political battle, a tit for tat between the state and the county. And what was interesting that the sheriff said is that he has a lot of experience with physical penetration tests. He's well aware of the industry. He's very much supportive of the industry and what we're doing, and thanks us for everything that we're doing. He said that in this specific case with Coalfire, though, there was a lot of issues that occurred during this period of time. And his main argument seemed to stem around the Coalfire testers not giving a heads up to the law enforcement, the police department, the sheriff's department, prior to the assessment being conducted. And what happened was when they broke into the facility, they had police officers going 130, 140 miles an hour, trying to get to this location to respond as fast as possible and put the public in danger. And whether or not you agree with that or not, that was kind of their stance and what and he couldn't talk about a lot of the issues with the case.
So a couple interesting aspects here, right? Sheriffs are elected officials that have a jurisdiction a little higher than local police, which I think people have to understand is that when you're in a rural area where you don't have local police, sheriffs typically have jurisdiction in those areas, and they will, because they're government officials, typically roll up to a higher level than necessarily a state. They have to also enforce federal law, which I think is an interesting perspective here in this case, right? Yeah. Versus a local police force, right? But to your point, Dave, which I think is interesting, we talked about this a little bit on the second segment, is there's a safety issue involved. Is you have responders responding to an attack that potentially puts the safety of other citizens at risk because they're going after this event. And so they're looking at this also from a safety perspective, not necessarily a security perspective.
Right.
Yeah.
And some of this is bleeding over from civilian to law enforcement. I mean, you would never see like a law enforcement agency conducting an exercise in someone else's jurisdiction, even if they had some kind of vague jurisdiction without letting them know, at least somebody, so that this kind of thing wouldn't happen. I mean, you wouldn't have like DEA agents skulking around buildings and things without notifying these people. And I think there's some bleed over from this sort of civilian behavior into this law enforcement behavior.
Jurisdiction is an issue.
And the civilians don't really know those sort of proper behavior, proper form kind of things that you would normally have notified the sheriff and said, we're conducting an activity that might involve your officers. I mean, I've run these kind of exercises before, and we had to call a lot of people to run a police exercise. It was being run by the police in a town just so that everybody was in on it. And they didn't tell every single person that was in on it, but they told the people that mattered. They told the chiefs, they told the sheriff, they told everybody. He said, this is what's going on out there at the firehouse. No need to go out there with guns blazing, and that's good for you too as a pen tester. You don't want these guys coming in there with a SWAT team and saying we saw somebody grab somebody, because people are messing around with these things. And I did some physical pen tests in Houston, and when we were outdoors. I mean, I always called somebody and said, I just want to let you know, and they're usually like, yeah, cool. It's as long as we know, it's fine. Everybody's in on it.
So Dave, what was the specifics of this incident along those lines? And the reaction.
Well, I fully agree. So a couple things. I want to first chime in and say that I fully support Coalfire and its testers. It's a very unfortunate situation. They were charged originally with felonies. Now they're getting charged with misdemeanors.
Yeah.
Can you guys still hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, your video froze for a second. You're still there, though. Yep.
Okay, cool. And so, that's one specific thing there to call out is that the charges have gotten dropped to misdemeanor, but still, they should be dropped completely. There's a couple of issues with how they handled the situation too, from a Coalfire perspective. It wasn't perfect on their end. They had specific time windows that they were supposed to be conducting the engagement and assessment itself, and they were outside of those time windows when that occurred. So that's one issue that when you're doing a physical test, you mentioned earlier about the specifics of it. You have to stay within line of the scope of the engagement that you have. So if it says it's 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., and you're only allowed to do these types of tests against the infrastructure, the physical location that you're testing, you have to stay within confines of those specific tests. I do agree that notification of law enforcement, especially now and looking forward, is an absolute must. We need to notify law enforcement when we're conducting these activities. To me, it doesn't really make sense to test the response time for law enforcement. It never really has. We've been notifying law enforcement when we're doing physicals, especially at night, for years and years and years. I can't remember the last time we actually did a covert test where we didn't notify law enforcement.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that, Dave. So that's standard practice now in our industry, is that we always notify law enforcement.
And it's not just local law enforcement. It's got to be the sheriff, because in certain jurisdictions, the sheriff actually has precedence over local law enforcement, especially in rural areas. And when you look at Iowa, and I don't know exactly where this took place, but the sheriff potentially has jurisdiction over any local law enforcement. So you have to notify both just to make sure you kind of cover your
nuance to
it is a nuance that most people don't understand.
Yeah. And it's in this case, it's unfortunate because, the two initial sheriffs that came on site were basically going to let them go, and everything was perfectly fine. But then this third sheriff came in place, and then that's when the arrest actually took place. So the tension got there when this third sheriff came into place, and basically the arrests occurred after that, which is really unfortunate. And there's a lot of things that we can learn from this specific area. And one thing that we decided to do at TrustedSec is that I had all of our lawyers, because it's kind of freaked me out a little bit from a TrustedSec perspective.
Right. Yeah, because you have teams of people across the globe conceivably
all the time,
doing these tests.
All the time. We're doing physical tests every single day. And this freaked me out, and it freaked all of our testers out. And so we had an all-hands meeting over at TrustedSec to discuss, what our current protections were for our employees and what we can do to enhance them. And so I met with our current lawyers and another lawyer that specializes in this specific federal code. And we had them draft up additional wording and protections and things like that. And we open sourced all of that up to our GitHub site, so that hopefully other companies that maybe don't have a good law firm could use this documentation for themselves.
Well, and I just want to highlight this good deed, because lawyers don't typically work for free, Dave. But what you're saying is that you essentially, and I want to speak for you, but pay these lawyers to draft this language and then said, look, we're going to take what we paid for, and we're going to give it to the
available to the rest of the community.
Which is that is an awesome good deed.
Kudos.
Yeah.
Dave, are you getting a better response to this? I know the first time I ever did this, I called, it wasn't a sheriff, but I called a chief of police, and they didn't know what I was talking about, and they acted all freaked out about it. And I think, at least here, today, if I called computer crimes at state police and said, here's what we're doing, they would be like, oh, okay, yeah, cool. They might ask some questions or want to know who's involved or who these people are. But are you getting a better response to that kind of notification now than maybe 10, 15 years ago?
That's a great question. If you look at 10 years ago, I would say the exact same thing, that where they would have no idea what we're doing. Right. They would have a lot of questions. They'd be really nervous.
Yep.
But I'd say a large percentage of the physical assessments that we do where we notify law enforcement, they are very welcoming of it. They understand. They make notes, and their shifts know about it.
Yep.
They have a very good process for handling it. And that's not across the board. There are a lot of other, especially when you're going to a lot of rural areas in the middle of nowhere. There are, if you're going to a branch location for a bank in the middle of, West Virginia, they're not going to necessarily know those specific ins and outs. And so we do run into situations still to this day where there's not a lot of education around what we're trying to accomplish, and they require a lot more verification, and not as comfortable with it. But they still allow us to conduct our jobs, which is good.
And look, physical pen testers, let me give you a caution. Don't just assume because you're going to stay on the grounds of that organization that gave you a scope that you're good. Because people are noticing things, and they will call the police and they will say, I saw somebody climbing a window over there on the premises. And if the police don't know about that, their protocol may be to respond, and you may literally find out that the SWAT team's pulling up out front.
That begs the question: if you're in a rural area where law enforcement seems like they don't get it, does it behoove us as security testers to go, look, we're going to go do this assessment, but before we do that, maybe we go meet in person with local law enforcement, introduce ourselves, and say, hey, this company that's in your jurisdiction hired us to do this testing. I just want to sit with you and explain it because we don't want anything bad to happen on either side, right? I don't want to cause you
They'll
to
be
deploy
cool with that.
resources to drive 120 miles an hour and
They
put
will
people
be
at
really
risk,
happy
right?
that you did that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Is that a logical kind of path to go down that we have to do now, especially given this recent Coalfire incident?
I think if you look at police departments or sheriff's offices that are familiar with this type of assessment, I don't know if that step is necessary, but especially if you get the vibe that, hey, these folks don't know what's going on and they're really skittish about it, I think that would make an actual step. I've never done that before personally, but I think it's a great addition to safety. And that's, at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is minimize the risk of our testers from having any type of issue whatsoever when it comes to law enforcement, armed guards, things like that, where they can have a loss of life or, potential felonies or misdemeanors.
Right.
We're obviously doing this for the greater good and trying to help these companies get better at security. Anytime we can do better education, I fully support that 100%. It's a great idea to add to it.
Now, Dave, you said your legal team had made additional recommendations and put that into the documents which you've open sourced. What were some of the things that they added in, obviously not legalese, obviously you're not a lawyer, I'm not a lawyer, but like break it down for our audience at a high level.
Yeah, that's a great question. So there's three core documents that were released. There's the Master Service Agreement, which is physical security language to put in your master service agreements for your customers that you have. There's a statement of work agreement that has physical security language in there. And then there's a physical authorization letter. And those three are the three main ones. What we also did is we put tips in the README on the GitHub site. We put bullet points on things that you should do when you're developing a physical security test with a customer, things that you should ask for, things that should be done, people who should sign the documents, things that we've run into before that could hopefully alleviate some of these issues in the future. What the legal documents state is that we're basically going to be conducting a physical security assessment and we're noticing under the federal section 18 USC 1030 that the client agrees to inform all appropriate parties and authorities that we're going to be doing the testing. So it puts the burden on the customer, but that's definitely something that you want to communicate with. It could be you calling the local sheriff's office or the police or your customer as well. And what it does is there's no protection. Like people were asking, well, this wouldn't have stopped the Coalfire incident, and it may have or it may not have. It puts the burden on the customer to notify all appropriate employees. And when this specifically happened, they didn't notify the county. This could have been an issue that they could have pointed back at the actual legal agreement and said, hey, you didn't notify everybody, put the burden back onto them. So, but it doesn't save you from the charges against breaking into a location. So what our lawyers came up with in this specific case is that in the event that something goes wrong and you're charged with some sort of felony or misdemeanor or something like that, or get arrested, the client agrees to pay up to $25,000 per contractor to help with the criminal charges brought against them. And so it wasn't to punish the customer. It was to show the severity of what these types of tests are and how imperative important it is to make sure you have the right amount of people to really do this assessment and you have the right approvals. I mean, think about the variations that we have here. Maybe you're doing a physical security assessment on a company where they don't own the building.
Yeah.
So if you're doing, and the company gives you authorization, do they have the authority on behalf of that building owner to conduct that assessment?
And you know what's interesting, Dave, when you say that, I immediately think of our situation. We rent our space, and last year our building put in cameras, right? And so how do you manage that when you're just and a lot of companies rent space all over the country, all over the world, conceivably, they rent space. And that's an interesting scenario. Like how, they're your customers, right? You're helping your customers, you're working with your customers. Is there a verification step to make sure that your customers actually contacted maybe the building landlord, maybe local law enforcement? Do you require a letter? Is that something your legal team maybe recommended, that there's you have a letter of attestation between you and your customer? Is there an additional letter from law enforcement acknowledging that, yes, we were notified?
That's a great question. For the authorization letter for physical tests, in there, it actually has the building owner as part of the signers of the actual physical authorization letter. So you do need to get that signed by the actual building owner and the customer itself authorizing you to conduct those assessments. They said for law enforcement, verbal is fine. However, what we would recommend is that the company, the consulting company, or whoever's conducting the physical security assessment, you reach out to law enforcement and not
verify.
necessarily put the burden on the customer.
And they will appreciate that.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, Dave, do you see this going down? A few years ago, there was a whole row about forensics, and there was this whole push by states to pass laws to require you to have a private investigator license, to have a bond, to have all these things. And I went out and got a private investigator's license, and I still have it. I hold a bond, a $10,000 bond that's required by the state that would actually prevent me from doing just these kind of things in this state. Do you see us
which I thought you had to go through more hoops to get a private
I had to
investigator.
go through some hoops.
Is that like, again, did you bring an envelope to someone in Rhode Island and hey, cousin Vinny, I need a
with some
PI
shady
license.
deals.
I met with a guy named Vic under that bridge down there in Providence. And actually, it was a great. I had this thing where a guy from state police, who was a lieutenant, was bringing me a bunch of documents related to something like this, and it was nothing illicit. But he said, "Could you just meet me? I'm on a patrol. I'm on a stakeout. Could you meet me?" And we met under a bridge down there in Providence, and he was handing me these things out the window of like an unmarked car. And I saw these guys across the street looking over there, and they're like, who's getting paid off over there under the bridge? But do you think we're going down that road, Dave? I mean that where we're going to end up having to have licensing and bonds and things like that just to do physical pen tests?
I think those types of certifications come through necessity. I don't think that this is a big enough issue for the local counties or states for that type of federal oversight to come into place for these. I could see it from the cyber side eventually, and maybe some sort of accreditation or association around ethics around that. But I don't see it for the physical side. I think when you look at the federal law, if you have authorization to access that building, you can essentially do anything you want to the building. You can smash the windows, you can tear down a wall as long as you get approval from the city. So there's no real federal issues that you're breaking in those specific cases. So it doesn't really require an extra step. It's just that the authorization piece of this is so important to ensure that you have the right people that you're going into this. And this one is such an unusual edge case because you're dealing with the state and the county. The state should have known that they didn't have authorization to break into a county building, just like a federal government couldn't come in and break into a state building or into a county building. It's the separation of powers and duties. So, you look at that and you say, this is an unusual case. If I was Coalfire Consultants, though, I probably wouldn't have known that. I figured, hey, the state probably contacted the county for the building. We're probably all set. Don't have to worry about it. And we'll go and break in this building without anything happening. So it's a really confusing one. I don't think it'll lead to another precedent where you need to have like a certification or process, or a license to go and do these things.
But now, Dave,
honestly, I do think that would make a big difference.
So we've talked about U.S. law. Now, my concern is many of us travel to other countries to help customers and do this.
Yeah. Good luck.
Basically, everything we've talked about up to this point, all bets are off once you leave the U.S. borders. No?
Do you know how to say life in prison in Chinese?
What's interesting is I brought this exact subject up to my lawyers, and the dollar sign started going over their eyes because you basically have to have
different.
Yeah, you have to have every country. Their laws are completely different. You have to have different jurisdictions, different approvals, and different ways of handling things with each individual country. And so, one thing that I think we've decided to do from a TrustedSec perspective is evaluate whether or not we want to actually do it in those countries and what the laws are around them. So it's on a per case basis. And one thing that I'll throw out there to everybody listening on Security Weekly is that when we start to do physicals, and we do physicals in other countries, when I start to get new legal wording for those individual countries, I will also release those up on the GitHub page as well as they're reviewed per case basis. I know we've done work in the Middle East several times, in the EU.
Thank you so much,
as
Dave.
those happen. We'll
and Tyler's laughing. Tyler's like, well, if you leave the country, just don't get caught, right?
So I have two questions for you. The first question is serious. The second one's kind of a joke. The first question is, would it behoove the pen testers to actually have the authorization document with them as a way to, just think about this for a second, right? You've got authorization, you've gone through the steps, you've done the things that you've done. Would it behoove the pen testers to actually have that document with them, just say, look, hand it to the law enforcement and say, look, I've got authorization to do this. Is that a protection mechanism that we should do or not?
You always carry it with you.
Okay.
Yeah. You should have that
like
with
we
you.
even write like a point of contact, like in permanent marker on a leg or an arm. Like you get one phone call in some of these places, and you carry whatever means you need to get out of, whatever country's jail that, you need to have. You have a point of contact in country. You have a point of contact at your organization that knows where you're at in that country.
But Tyler, Dave, I want to go back to a point of contact. It seemed to me in the Coalfire case, some of the things that we read, you need more than one point of contact. What if that point of contact is out of cell phone range or unavailable due to their own arguably negligence, right? In that time window, which Dave has already established, right? Got to be in that time window. But, maybe the contact got an invite to a party and didn't realize they were out of cell phone range and they were unavailable. Do you need more than one point of contact is the question.
You typically have 3.
Mm-hmm.
The authorization form that we published has a minimum of 2 contacts required in order to do the authorization. And that actually is out of necessity. I was doing a physical test out of Wisconsin for a really large organization. And it was one of our other engineers, Paul Koblitz. And we broke into one of the side doors and we triggered a silent alarm. And the police came, and this is several years ago. So this is before we notified police. And the police officers came, and we gave them our authorization letter. And what we realized, this is another catch-22 that you want to do as well, is verify the numbers of the point of contact person prior to you doing the engagement.
What if someone fat-fingered the note? Don't tell me someone fat-fingered.
That's exactly what happened. It sucks so bad. God. You have no idea. So we got put in the back of a cop car, and we were there for 4 hours because it was 2 o'clock in the morning, and the numbers they gave weren't the right numbers, and no one was answering the phone. So they had to wait for people to come into the building and notify that we were there. So we sat in the back of a cop car for 4 hours, and he was really nice. I mean, he's like, I really believe you guys, but I cannot let you go without somebody from this company letting you know.
The police officers just doing their job at that point.
Oh,
right?
yeah,
so,
absolutely.
And I got stopped for skulking in another state. And because we were outside on the grounds, it was like 2 a.m. with flashlights looking to see if any of the doors were open. And a patrol officer who was just driving past saw the flash. This was on company grounds. So the company owned these grounds. He saw it, decided to pull in there and see what was going on. And I sat in the back of that police car, and I actually had the card for the chief of police, gave him the card, and he said, what do you want me to do, call this guy in the middle of the night and wake him up? That's my boss. And I said, I guess you're going to have to if you're going to hold me here. And I had his number. I had the CISO of the company who had authorized this, had the documents, had my PI license, had all this stuff. And the guy was still like, well, you're sitting there with handcuffs on in the back of the
look at it from that officer's perspective.
No, he did exactly what he was supposed to do.
Now I gotta wake up my boss out of bed. Like, how many of us want to wake up their boss out of bed?
If I was some psycho, and I mean, we had burglary tools in the car, and they had us sitting in the squad. Now the guy was really super cool, and he super handled it, and he called dispatch, and the dispatch decided they called the company and woke the guy up, and he said, oh, yeah, they're working for us. What the hell? And he said, well, they had flashlights. They're walking around here in the middle of the night. And then they let us go, and the guy was like, man, I'm sorry, I just doing my job. But, yeah, you better have some ways to reach some people, or you're going to get transported to the nearest facility, and you're going to get held, and you may get held in a holding cell until somebody comes in to take you to court on Monday morning. And so you definitely want to have all those numbers and make them available. And the more licenses and piece of paper you have showing that you have every right to be there. Usually I just give them Tyler's home phone number and say, Tyler's going to save me on this.
But I think it's an important point that your point of contact, whether it's in law enforcement and or from the company, that they know when testing is going to happen and be like, look, I know when you go to bed on Wednesday night that we're going to be doing testing, and that could mean if we get caught, and let's face facts, all of us have been caught. I mean, we all just shared stories, right? Except for Tyler, who's never gotten caught. But all of us have gotten caught at some point, except for Tyler.
If that screen drops, it's an Indonesian prison.
At some point, it happens, right? Like Doug said, there just happened to be a patrol car coming by. That doesn't speak to the company's physical security. That just means that the town or whatever has pest patrols are looking at stuff, job. Right? But to have multiple points of contact and make your points of contact aware that, hey, on Wednesday night at 2 a.m, like, I know you're sleeping and all, but you might get woken up because we might get caught, right? I mean, that's just, we have to face facts.
So to play devil's advocate here and to bring up a kind of an argument I've heard on the other side of this Coalfire side story is if you're notifying, say you're sharing either leased building or you're notifying law enforcement, say it's a small community, people talk, word gets around, you're trying to test the response times, the capabilities of either a company, maybe there's not an alarm company, maybe there's not a security company, maybe it is a local police, and you're trying to
so what you're saying, Tyler,
the security.
Is you got to be able to run faster than the local police. Like, it's a game of who's more fit.
You better rent a really fast car.
Right.
So really, like, if you remove that layered defense and you remove that point, so essentially you're doing almost an assumed breach if you're looking at it from a pen test standpoint. Yep. And you're removing that layer. How do we appropriately test these facilities where we're sharing lease space, where the building security is outsourced, where the monitoring of cameras, like, these are things that the client may or may not be able to improve, but this is directly affecting their security, and we still need to evaluate and test that, which we usually do. How do we notify these companies? Because the building's going to look bad if we get in and get past them. So, their best case is letting their guards know, hey, we've got tests these next couple of weeks. Like, let's be extra vigilant. Let's have some extra staff so that we look good.
Right.
So how do we appropriately continue this testing and evaluate things that are important, right? Like, physical security is a great initial access vector that we continually use, and we still have to be able to test this appropriately. So, getting all these licenses, all this heat around this is causing people to not want to do the physical pen test, which is not helping security at all.
Right.
In fact,
or the point that
license.
But all the point, what you're alluding to, Tyler, also is, like, information wants to be free and people talk. So if we're doing all this due diligence and notifying people, now everyone knows we're doing a test. And how much does that diminish the testing
itself.
that you're doing?
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's really tough, but I do know that if you drilled that down into the, like, county level or something like that, at least in the Northeast, and you didn't notify those people, you got problems.
I mean, it's better than sitting in the back of a police car for 4 hours.
I want to get Dave's perspective on, like, how much does this diminish testing? You've published this notification process in legal documents, but what's the double-edged sword of it impacting the effectiveness of your testing, because now people know that you're doing the tests, right?
Yeah, so there's a couple of points I think to hit on this. It's not going to be every case where you have to notify the building owner, because the company that you might be doing the assessment for may own the building, right?
Sure.
So, I would say 70% of the time, company owns the building that we're going and testing. 30% of the time, depending, especially if you're in a city with shared buildings, definitely you're probably not owning that building. But in this specific case, you want to notify law enforcement, and you want to try to explain to the building tenant or not the building tenant, but the building owner, that these types of tests are to improve security, and it's not going to look poorly upon the building owner in the event that we are able to get around. And it's best that if they do not tell their security staff that these types of events are happening. So it's it's important to understand that. Now, are we reducing some of the effectiveness of the test? Yes, because you want to obviously test people's response times. Are they actually looking at the screen? There's been many penetration tests we've gone into where they're not looking at the screen at all, and they have 3 guards on duty, and they're all sitting there playing on their phones, and they don't see us actually breaking into the building in the first place. So you don't want to lose that element of testing that effectiveness, but there are certain circumstances where you're going to have to notify the building owner, and hopefully they are understanding that we do want to test your guards, we want to test how effective they are, and we pay for this building and its security. Please do not, notify them and let them know that it's happening during those periods of time. And that type of explanation, unfortunately, is going to be necessary from here on out, knowing what happened with Coalfire.
Right.
We're going to have to do that. And I'll give you a prime example. And I unfortunately can't talk much about it. But there was an incident that we were dealing with out of Chicago, where we broke into a building where we didn't have authorization from the building tenant owner, and because we thought we had access through the company, And this is where, something like Coalfire could have happened to us in 100%.
Yep.
And so we broke into the building, and we didn't do anything crazy. We cloned a badge with somebody that was walking out of the building. We, went into the badge system, badged ourselves in, walked up to the level of the floor that we're breaking into, and then we, conducted a physical test where we were able to break into the facility and that specific floor for our customer. And, when they presented the findings for that report to the building owner, they flipped out and immediately lawyered up. And, we were dealing with lawyers back and forth. And finally, we basically had to attest that we weren't going to do that again. If we were going to conduct it, we had to get through. They eventually calmed down, but they could have easily gone after us and said, "Listen, you broke into this building in an unauthorized fashion," and we could have been in the exact same situation that Coalfire was in.
So my second question is: does Baker Mayfield have permission from the Browns Stadium to do all the Progressive commercials?
I would assume so. Those are pretty good commercials, though. But I would assume he does. But if not, that's pretty funny.
I was just saying, I had to pull the Cleveland thing in because
you guys.
If you haven't seen the commercials, if no one knows what you're talking about, you don't watch sports ball. Baker Mayfield's our quarterback for the Browns, which has kind of been a little bit disappointing this year.
Yeah.
But he has all these pictures of him and his wife, or videos with him and his wife, basically living in
the stadium,
the Cleveland Stadium.
Yeah.
And so, his wife goes to make some food, and
I've seen those commercials.
Trying to do the circuit breakers, trying to open them up and everything. So it's pretty good.
Yeah, cleaning the stadium at the end of the day. I'm like, does he have authorization from the Browns to actually be in the stadium to record those commercials? Because if he doesn't, he might be in hot water.
Well, we talk about permission for doing pen testing. We have to get permission to record at all these conferences as well, to record commercials and do all that stuff. So permission isn't just limited to physical pen testing. I mean, permission is permission to access a particular facility, and you better work within the guidelines of the organization, the building owner, law enforcement at local, county, state, sheriff, federal level to make sure you have all your bases covered, because you could run into, Dave just described a situation where you can get into legal trouble.
And you want local PD on your side. I did a thing in a large city, and it was a forensics thing. It wasn't physical pen test break-in stuff, and it turned into we had notified local PD, which was a large organization, and this thing turned into a guy with a shotgun going to commit suicide, and it was really good that the local PD guys were on our side and they knew what was going on, and they were nearby actually. So it was really handy. And I had one in a nearby state. Same kind of thing. Guy shows up with a machine gun, essentially, crazy divorce case kind of stuff. And the fact that we had notified local PD and said, we're doing this forensics thing out here, and this guy's supposed to be a nut. And they were like, "Oh yeah, we know that guy. We'll get
local PD always knows that guy.
I'll make sure I got a car sitting down there near the neighborhood, and we needed it. And I had 911 on a speed dial. I was like, okay, we're at the house, and this guy's out in the driveway, and he's crazy.
Well, I think a really positive thing, Dave, too, right? You talked about the difference between 10 years ago and today working with local law enforcement. I think they're much more aware of cybersecurity in general, physical penetration. Personally, friends of mine that work in local law enforcement are transitioning into cybersecurity as a career path, and they're just more aware of these issues, which is like Doug's saying, good for everyone.
It makes it so much easier, because when you call, if they don't know, they say, call state. Like here, they're going to say, call computer crimes and tell them what's going on. And there's so many mechanisms now for letting people know. I agree with Tyler. It definitely dilutes the ability, but there's so many bad situations you can get into these things, even when it's totally self-contained. Like we did one where the guards were not supposed to have firearms. Guess what? Guy's got a 38 strapped to his ankle and starts blazing away down the hall. And I'm like, I'm really glad I notified the police, and because this guy's saying I saw a break-in and all this stuff, and I'm like, wow, it's crazy.
That happens more often than not. And honestly, if I'm not arguing one way or another as far as whether that's diluting the test. It is definitely the advocate side of the argument, and it's really it's a business decision. It's a return on investment, right? When we're doing an assumed breach, we have a certain budget, a certain time frame, and we're able to conduct that test appropriately for the threat model that we're emulating at that point. And again, if we're notifying police and that dilutes it a little bit, that's fine. that is part of the test, and that's the business decision and risk reward for both the pen testing company and the company in which you're testing. Those are decisions that you both have to come to an agreement on, and that's why the paperwork and the documentation has to be kind of very, very clear about why you're doing it a certain way and certain misnomers that may be a part of that.
And that's a sales pitch that you need to be able to develop. And if you can take that to them and convince them of the value added of not calling all their officers and saying, we're testing your organization, and convince them of that, then they'll buy into it. And you can keep it at a level where it's not going to dilute the test. And if you don't do that, or you're not very good at doing that, and then they call all their officers and say, oh, yeah, they're testing you right now, they're going to test you tonight, then the test is worthless. Right. So you have to find a way to sell that.
Now,
everything
Dave,
we've talked about.
This is important, right? And what I want to, the question for you, Dave, is it's important for us as testers to do this due diligence, to do these tests. It's important for customers to go through all of these legal steps and engage with folks like us in the community that can do these physical tests. All of this is worth it. Right?
Yeah. I want to emphasize that all of this comes down to communication.
Yeah.
And there's no way that you can over communicate in these types of situations. When you're explaining to the building owner that this is the test, we're not here to point out things that you're doing wrong. We're here to ensure that there's appropriate safety controls to protect our data and our people. And that, when we look at this, it's not going to be like, hey, we want to go with a different building. As tenants of this building, we want to ensure that, hey, we're doing everything we possibly can to protect it. And when you start to communicate as a human to other humans,
right?
I always find that, most of the time, 99% of the time, people are receptive to listening to you. If you come in and you're like, hey, we're the testers, we're going to do this, you're not going to notify them, we're going to take control of your building, and we're going to do this, this, and that. They're going to be less receptive because you're attacking their building. And the same thing goes in cyber. Like, has anybody ever done a social engineer engagement for a customer where you warn the customer, like, listen, you should notify everybody the first time you do a social engineering engagement for your company because everybody's going to freak out and get pissed. And they don't do it. And then you send an email and then a whole bunch of VPs are pissed and they're emailing the CISO and they're all pissed off. And, it's the same thing when you do these types of engagements. And maybe the first one you do for this company, it is overt, so that the security guards know that it's happening and that the building owner knows that it's happening and what the after actions are for those. And then after that, you space it out and you do one that's more covert in nature to help them out in the future.
You win everyone over by going, look, we're going to tell everyone that a test is happening and we're here to help. And then it helps them understand that, like, I saw you trying to come through.
By the way. Same thing for police officers.
Yeah, exactly. Everyone learns. And then when it happens in the future, they go, another test is happening. I know that these firms are helping everyone collectively improve their security, improve safety of everyone that's involved, and this is a good thing. I think it's an excellent point, Dave, and certainly worth it for everyone involved to have these things tested, basically.
If you can get the engagement, one of the most successful ways to make a physical pen test a win, if the engagement allows it, and it's not like a red team where you're having to be super stealthy, is bringing in the building staff or whoever's managing building facilities, and even local law enforcement, bringing in either the sheriff or some of the crew and walking them through and doing a step-by-step, like, here's what I look for at this lock, here's why this lock would allow me to get in, and doing a demonstration, walking through, showing them how an adversary thinks, and providing that free training and natural education to them that provides a huge value to them, and they're all on your side for the next time you have to do that engagement. And really treating physical engagements no different than you do a penetration test where you're doing an internal. You're getting the appropriate documentation in place. You know what networks you're supposed to be testing. You know what is off limits, what's a business risk if you take it down, what's in and out of scope. We don't need extra accreditation. We don't need extra licenses to do that. We have all the access. We can phish someone and get the same level of access digitally. Physical is just another aspect of this attack. And if we treat it as such and move forward and take the appropriate communication and paperwork and legal aspects in the same care as we're doing a network test, then I don't see any issue as far as moving forward with these physical tests. It's just getting people on the same page, communicating, all being very professional as we're moving forward. This should be kind of dust under the rug at this point.
And in kind of the same vein as the community and the hacker ethic, Dave, obviously we're all very emotional about the last DerbyCon that happened, right?
Yeah.
One of the positive things that I unfortunately couldn't attend the event but saw come out of that was similar to B-Sides, creating a community around DerbyCon to continue the mission of DerbyCon, of the hacker ethic and the community, and having other people execute your vision. I think that the kind of highest form of things that we create is and I learned this very early on in my career. I was fortunate to work with people that are like, if you can teach other people to do things the same way that you did them, that was very successful when you did them, that's the ultimate form of what we're implementing in our career. You very much have accomplishing this with DerbyCon, right? Taking that community, that hacker ethic, and going, now it's everyone else's turn to promote this community and promote these conferences. It sounds like, did I capture that's what you're trying to accomplish here?
Yeah, absolutely right. The first day that we opened up DerbyCon communities, which was about a month ago, we had over 30 submissions for people wanting to create their own conferences or local chapters. And it was such a well-received event. And I'm a little bit behind on getting to those because I've literally been traveling every single day since September. But next week, I will be sending all the approvals out for all of the individuals there. And we had over 2,000 people sign up for notifications around DerbyCon events that are interested in doing that. And the whole intent with DerbyCon is, you look at the thing that you guys put out with Security Weekly on the emotion for DerbyCon. When people explained what DerbyCon was, and every single person was like, it's like a family. It's like a family that you go to where everybody gets along. There's something special here. It's people trying to share their knowledge. There's no judgment on anybody, and everybody's welcome. And it's one of those places where you can go to and just have a great time hanging out with new people that you meet, existing friends. And it's not as large as something like Black Hat or DEF CON. And what we wanted to accomplish with DerbyCon communities was we didn't want to recreate the wheel of B-Sides, because what Jack has created with B-Sides and Chris and everybody from the early days on those is incredible. B-Sides is by far one of the most monumental things that we have in this community for knowledge sharing and free events and things like that. What we wanted to do was create a way for people to create their own communities that emulate the feeling that you got at DerbyCon. And we also made it so that existing conferences can join the DerbyCon communities. So if you're a B-Sides, for example, or if you're a conference in Texas, you can go and join the conference itself, and you can join DerbyCon communities. So it doesn't mean that if we're not trying to compete with B-Sides in any way, shape, or form. We're trying to create a way for people to come to a place where they meet new people, that they can meet new friends, they can advance their career, they can share their own knowledge, and they can recreate what happened over at DerbyCon.
To me, DerbyCon's very much a culture. And to see that culture spread, right? Regardless if you're creating a B-Sides or a DC, in here it's 401, right?
X-Con, whatever the con is.
Exactly, whatever it is, to see that continuation of the culture was so rewarding for many of us that had gone to the first DerbyCon or however many DerbyCons we went to. And the biggest thing we missed was that culture, right? That DerbyCon created, that community, that family feeling that we had at DerbyCon. And I think that's really important for our community.
Yeah, there's a great TED Talk from a guy named David Logan called Tribal Leadership. And it's basically about setting the right tonality of something and creating your own culture. If you go into a company and everybody's in front of a screen, they're not talking, they come into their work, it's going to be a 9-to-5 job. But you go to a culture that everybody's communicating and talking and they're having fun, and maybe they bounce out at 3:00, and there isn't set hours to work at there. The culture that you create in your environment is a direct reflection off of you. And I think, for me at DerbyCon, I really tried, and what my team tried to accomplish was to set a culture from the top up that was accepting of anybody in this industry. When I first started DerbyCon 1, it was 100% all white males. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just the industry at the time. And you look at DerbyCon 9, and it was a mixture of women, different colors, just different races and genders and religions and everything else. And it was just a mixture of really creative people, because we allowed diversity into DerbyCon, and it came from the top up, that everybody, regardless of who you are, if you have 2 months in security, if you're a college student, if you're high schooler. We had a 9-year-old presenting, at DerbyCon.
I was there for that. Yeah,
thousands of people. Yep. It was a place where everybody was welcome. And we wanted to recreate that and have others recreate that special feeling there because, our industry is so dire of it.
David, in some of my previous roles, others have tried to create, in my previous jobs, right, create that family aspect. And they missed the mark. And those of you that know Dave, right, it'll come as no surprise that when I, ask Dave for something or talk with him, he's like, yeah, whatever you need, right? And it's not just because I'm Paul and he's Dave, right? Dave does that with whatever you need, right? And that culture, Dave, that you created specifically in just that one example, because your response to so many people's questions is, yeah, whatever you need, right? That's a family thing. When you're, regardless of where you stand with your family, if your family needs something, you're like, yeah, all right, whatever you need, right? And Dave was always that way with me, and not just me, with everyone in the community who was deserving of that wanted to try to share their knowledge to make the community better. Dave's like, yeah, whatever you need.
You tied the other piece, right? We talked about this earlier today in some of our meetings. It's culture and community. It's that balance of the culture and the community. And Dave, I think one of the things you did with DerbyCon is a beautiful culture, but giving back to the community and building that community aspect, which is also what Jack has done with B-Sides, by the way.
Yeah.
Right? If you really want to see how success happens in this space, it's the combination of the culture, which you've instilled in DerbyCon, but it's also that community reach and making sure that the community has a place to learn and grow and thrive. And it's those two combinations that are so unique that I think really makes the DerbyCon communities, B-Sides, and the other platforms so successful in educating all of us in the industry to really thrive.
Yep. And, one thing I'll say about the family aspect is that, this industry, when I first got into it, I came in, around 2000 is when I first came into this industry. And some of the people that I really equate my success to was Matty Mutz from Offensive Security and the community that he built with, originally it was Remote Exploit before Backtrack, before Cali. It was WAPX and IWAX and Auditor. And, you look at that community and, I first came into that channel, an IRC, and I had some questions and there was people there helping me. There's people there explaining to me things that I didn't know. And, I remember talking to Mutz one time, and I'm like, hey, Mutz, I really want to pick up a programming language. I know a little bit of C and some of this. And Mutz is like, dude, Python all the way. Here's the book to look at. Here's what you can do. Ping me if you have any ideas. And here's how I learned. He's like, build your first tool of something that you can automate that you currently do today. And my first tool that I ever wrote was a tool called Fast Track, which was a automation exploitation automation framework that ended up, becoming one of the more popular tools out there at that time. I presented at ShmooCon with it, at DEF CON with it. And, that community feel to me was so resonating and so important that, I look at the community and people will say the community's dead, and it's not. There is a community here. There's the InfoSec industry, and there's the InfoSec community, and there's many communities. There's a whole bunch of us in communities that are all different, doing different things at different times. But, for me, the community is my family, and I have a great family. I got kids. I got a life and everything. Everything's great. But the community to me is my family. In any way that I can help out people, I will do, because I feel I owe a debt of gratitude to the early folks like Mutz and everybody else that helped me out when I was going through issues that I didn't understand, or understanding what the community was, or understanding InfoSec in general. And I got arms wide open and accepted into a community that was absolutely amazing. And I know that other people haven't had that same experience, that they've had total a-holes and people that are totally trash talking and talk them down and are elitists and, egos and all this other stuff. And that's really why DerbyCon was created. We wanted to break all those barriers down so that everybody could come to it.
It's almost like that counter culture to assholes, basically, right?
Yeah.
And it's interesting when I'm doing the research for our Hacker History segment that we're airing on December 19th, and everything that we're saying here really speaks to the hacker ethic, the hacker culture, right? We want information to be free. We want those that want to learn to have that same information, to share that information. It's some of the foundations of open source. It's some of the foundations of the hacker culture. And to me, open source and a lot of the projects and DerbyCon, a lot of these conferences that we've attended over the years really help foster that community. And it's important to keep that going so that we can push away those people that aren't with that same culture and that same ethics of hackers. We want information to be free. I think open source is a huge, Fast Track was open source, right? It was a huge portion of why we share things, right? And why we want people to know that here's how you break into the system. It's why I read blog posts on TrustedSec about how to break into things. And I'm like, we're all still, most of us are embodying that hacker spirit. It's important that we push that forward, right? It's one of the reasons why we created this show, to be quite honest.
Yeah, absolutely.
And this show has been instrumental in my career too. I remember 2005, maybe 2006, it was early times when my first ShmooCons. And, that's when I first met you, Paul. You probably don't remember this, but you and Jack were basically in the hallway giving a live podcast, and discussions. And I'm like, this is the coolest thing ever, that these people are just talking about things that I'm interested in. And that's when I became a fan of, I'm not allowed to use the word Paul.com, but I was a fan of Paul.com then.
It was Paul.com back then, yeah.
Yeah, and then the evolution of Security Weekly. And, one thing I'll close on, I got to get to basketball here soon, but one thing I want to close on is that, growing up as a kid, I didn't have friends. Like, I wasn't popular in school. I came from a very low class family where my parents moved from job to job to job. And, I really cherish the friendships that I have now that I didn't have when I was a kid, and the people that I've been able to meet. And it's just an amazing opportunity. And, when at DerbyCon 9, I'm not going to tear up. I'm trying to tear up here. But at DerbyCon 9, just looking into the audience and seeing everybody out there, and seeing their eyes the same as my eyes were, and what we were able to accomplish was a lifelong dream for me. And I hope that people with DerbyCon communities can replicate that same feeling, that you can make a huge difference in this community for people to be accepting of one another, to get around our differences, and to really promote this industry to make the world a better place. And I really think that that's what we're here to do. In security is to make the world a better place, to make technology a better place, to make it safer for our children. And hopefully you can do that with DerbyCon communities.
I couldn't have put it better myself, Dave.
I have one closing note. You need to get out your inner LeBron on your basketball game tonight.
Listen, I'm so nervous about this basketball game. You have no idea. Like, I'm going to be going out there, and I'm not going to be good at all. And I'm playing with a really good team, so I hope they don't judge me. So we'll see.
Just get your little talcum powder and do your little clap, and boom, you're in the moment.
I'm wearing LeBron shoes. So I'm wearing LeBron shoes.
There you go, baby.
There you go. Well, Dave, thank you so much again for appearing on Paul Security Weekly.
Absolutely. Thank you all for having me and for what you all do week in and week out. Such an amazing asset to this community. Love you all. Thank you so much. Mwah.
Thanks, Dave. And with that, we'll take a short break, come back, and cover the security news for this week. Stay tuned. Don't go anywhere.